Weapons might seem like a silly thing, a strange thing, maybe even self-indulgent to really focus on when it comes to world building. And, maybe there is a little bit of truth to that. For me, when I was younger, working on designing swords and weapons was fun because I was a young boy who was obsessed with swords and shields and all the other things that you would kind of associate in that realm. And I think perhaps at first it was a little bit self-indulgent. It was fun just to engage in these artifacts of war. And first of all, I'm not sure there's anything particularly wrong with being a little bit self-indulgent with your art. If you're sitting down and building a world, you're most likely doing it for yourself at the end of the day, even if it is in service of something else, like a story that you're trying to tell. There's always going to be this element of, I'm building this thing because I want to, either to serve me or because the designing and building of it in and of itself is entertaining, is enjoyable, is worth something to me. But the older I got, the more I realized that weapons actually are a pretty interesting and beneficial place to invest time when you're world building. And the reason for this is pretty simple and straightforward. Something I've touched upon in prior sessions as well, and that has to do with shape language. With the fact that if you focus on designing a gate, the city layout, the clothing, the iconography, the tapestries, the logos, and heraldry of a particular location, you are honing in on elements of what makes that people group different than other people groups. And weapons allow for the same thing. In the ones that I'm working on right here, these are weapons of a fantasy race of people that are fairly elementally bound, and this particular group is fire-based. And so there is a lot of focus on reds and yellows and oranges from a color palette, which again is an important thing that can kind of come up when you're working on weapons. And I decided that their design motifs were going to be almost entirely geometric. I started with the idea of focusing on octagons, but I have diversified a little bit. It's key when you're doing this not to overcommit, to marry yourself to an idea before you've really put the time into it. And that can be really hard. And actually, at first, it's not that necessary. It's not a big deal at the beginning of your process to be focused on designing something that is incredibly specific, that is very, very, very focused. There's not a problem there. I think that the problem comes when you linger in that attachment. If you start off by designing elves with the loose idea that all of their design motifs are going to be organic in the same way that Peter Jackson did for the Lord of the Rings films, that's totally fine. But if you only stay there and you never allow anything to branch out, even when a particular design for a building, a piece of armor, or a weapon would have made way more sense if you deviated, then I think you've potentially overcommitted. Maybe not, but I think that being open to different possibilities and the manipulation of the traits that you're applying to things can be really, really smart. So I started off here basically with the idea that I'm going to keep these weapons roughly geometric. I'm going to try to focus on octagons and hexagons, and we're just going to kind of see where that goes. The first designs I made are kind of the ones up here, and you can see things do change and shift a little bit as I move throughout the page. This page, I think, probably took me about maybe an hour to put down initially. I know sometimes I start these sessions and we've got the sketching done, sometimes we've got the inking done, sometimes we're working on coloring. So it can be potentially a little bit difficult. I wish that I could show, I wish hypothetically that I could show every piece of this. I don't in actuality, because that would mean that I was having to work on everything while I'm recording, and that would not be pleasant. Like, it would be nice for all of you, I'm sure, but there's certain level of stress that comes with recording. The biggest of which I've mentioned many times, which is I can't shift my sketchbook around in the way that I would generally like to make sure that my lines are, more perfect. And that's not a huge deal, but it is something that bothers me from time to time when it comes to this. But so this page took me about an hour, I think, to get the pencil and the ink. I didn't do it in one sitting. I've done it over several. I have a tendency not to work on any of these pages from start to finish in one go, mostly because I don't have the time. Usually I'm not going to sit down or I don't have the ability to sit down and work for 2 to 3 hours on a single page in a single sitting. That would be nice, though what I presume to be ADHD would likely make that rather difficult as well. So most of the time I don't do that. But yeah, this page probably has an hour and a half worth of time put into it before what you're seeing today, just for, fairness, so you know approximately how much time these things are taking. I've done this kind of design work a lot. I actually have a bachelor's of fine arts in graphic design, and a lot of what we did in that was simply focus on shape language and how you can simplify forms and communicate things. If there's anything in my degrees that have helped with my art and world building, it's probably that. That and the resilience that comes from having to work on project after project after project that each requires somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 different thumbnail sketches, little quick sketches like this to focus in on an idea. But I would like to spend a little bit of time and talk about how I get to this. Because this specifically, I'm working on designing these things in, and that's totally fine. But I want to take a couple minutes at least and show how I get to these things, and then I think we can come back and we can work on this. So let's do that. So I will generally start off like I do in almost all these things with a little bit of pencil sketching. See if this guy's going to show up. I'll probably draw a little bit darker than I would normally. So in this case, I was starting off with geometric designs. So I wasn't coming in here generally and going okay, let's build this into an octagon and let's make that, that's not usually how I do this. Usually what I would do is I would give myself a square so I could make sure that I had something that is solidified. This gives me a good baseline to work on. Is it a perfect square? No. Is it necessary to pull out a ruler and make it perfect? No. What this does though is now I can bisect this. I can sit there and go, okay, let's give myself some guidelines here. And all of this happens pretty quickly. I don't put an enormous amount of time into this because it's not necessary in the thumbnailing stage. And so maybe, again, this is under the idea that this is a geometric design. So I'm giving myself some guidelines. Now, what I can do right here that'd be really easy is I could kind of take these down and connect them. All of these guidelines allow me to make sure my lines are parallel when they need to be, have the right connecting points so you're not, working on something like this and you go oh crap, those are not lined up correctly. Again, if you do that on purpose, totally fine. It's a design decision. But the way that I'm doing it right here, I'm trying to give myself something so that I can make these things parallel. And maybe, that's all I need for this one. A lot of the time that's the case. Then I could come in here and I could give myself this. Maybe we do, a little bit of battle damage, especially if you're working and your hand just kind of slips. You're like, oh man, that line's not going to be perfect anymore. You know what? Just make an indent, make something that makes it look like it's seen some wear and tear. So that would give me a good initial shape. If I wanted to now, there's no reason why I can't go, okay, cool, I got my initial shape. I'm going to go back in. I wouldn't erase yet. Those pen marks will take a few minutes before they're going to be in a spot that's going to be good for erasing. So I could go back in now and be let's make some of these edges bladed, right? And so I'm going to go around the interior. I'm going to have these kind of come out at the bisecting point. And maybe here at the bottom, we've actually got something that's an extra piece of metal that's put on just to give it some uniqueness. And then we'll do some bolts there to make it look a little bit more intriguing too. So it could come across like this, down, maybe just a little bit of a line there, up. And if we really wanted to, we could even go out on the side here. Like if we still had lines we could erase if we hadn't been rushing. We could go out like this. All of this is just expanding on this same idea, the same shape. If I had a really concrete idea for what I wanted to do here, that would not be a problem. There's no reason why I couldn't sit there and go, okay, I'm designing a shield for this person specifically with this task. Totally fine. It's not what I'm going to focus on right now because I want to, kind of just show you how I come up with these ideas. I'm going to go around and put these potentially not serrated, but like edged components on. And so we have something really simple here, but it looks a little bit intriguing. Often then in the middle, I'll kind of give myself just some random shapes. So I have some things to put a splash of color in. I don't always do this, but sometimes it's rather fun. And of course, sometimes this turns out really silly or, purposeless. And that's fine. Like you're going to run into that when you make a lot of thumbnail sketches. So that would be like a really quick rendition of how I put together a shield design. Now for a weapon, I might do the same thing. I'm generally going to start off with a line. And then I'm not going to give myself the same boundaries. Maybe I'm going to come in here and like, okay, that immediately tells me like I'm going to need a handle of some kind. Well, is the handle going to look best in the middle? Suppose if it's a pole arm, but you could go the other side. So like we could just, sometimes when you don't know, just make another one, make an identical or pretty similar sketch and then see what happens. What if we have the handle come off that and we did the handle like this? And we have a blade that's done like that. Well, if we do this, it's probably going to need some kind of guard. We'll go down. And then again, I can just kind of start going in with my pen marks. Sometimes my sketches will be a lot more detailed. Sometimes they won't be. It's totally up to you, and you'll kind of find your happy place. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but like you'll find how you like to work. I wish I could tell you, like, I've done this long enough. Here is the correct method for world building weapons and swords and iconography, but it's not going to be like that. That's not how any of this works. So much of this entire process is individualized, and so you've got to give yourself the grace and the time to figure out how you want to do things. We could do some wrapping on this as if there's cloth bound on this handle to allow for a better grip. Maybe up here on the end we've got more of an ornamental detail because you're not probably going to be holding this from the end. You could have something on this actual blade structure itself. We do a couple little bolts. For this one, let's go down here, over, give ourselves that same blade design. Let's make sure those are parallel. This is a good point where like I can draw these lines really well, but if I was drawing this not on camera, I would definitely be switching my sketchbook that way. There's a part of me that just wants to do it anyway, but the reality is the stuff that you can not see here off camera is going to run into it and make it a pain. All right, well, let's do another little piece so it feels like we're downsizing adequately. And then you could go off of this and have something more like a pole arm. Probably the edge we'll do like this. And again, that would be like a really simple design. And that's how I do a lot of these. And as you might expect, and you would probably run into this as well, the more of these kind of things you do, the more adventurous you get. You try different things, you throw different shapes on there. Half the time it doesn't work, but you're trying to sift through the detritus and find like the beautiful pieces at the bottom of it. Like I don't like either of these. I like this guy all right. Part of that might have been just I'm getting warmed up, I'm putting these things down. Part of it just sometimes you're going to land on designs you don't like. Is it worth putting time into to figure out that design specifically and hone it? Sometimes. Sometimes I make world building sketches and I'm like, I know that's not what I want. And I can just drop it there. There's no reason to continue working on something if you know definitively you're not going to use it later. But I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and kind of walk you through like, that's what the actual sketching and inking phase will often look like for me. Sometimes it's a little slower. Sometimes it's a little bit more specific. But I will just do things quickly to get started. And often I find that if I throw away the first couple sketches, essentially, not literally, but if I know that my first couple sketches don't matter, I can kind of mentally be in that headspace, It allows me a little bit more peace moving through everything else. Okay, I'm gonna put this away and we'll go back to the other sketchbook. So if I'm taking a look at this page and thinking about some of the designs on here, like obviously this one never really got finished, so I probably won't touch it right now. I'll come back later and do something with that. I'm not sure what this little blade thing is here. I like these designs. They're similar to what we were just talking about. I don't necessarily like how this spike is oriented, but I do like the idea of playing around with that idea. Having a spike come off the back might have been an intriguing way to go. You know, that's something that we see in some knives like that. You could do something like this where there's actually a spike on the back side of the blade. I actually have some sugar beet knives that look a little bit like that. So that'd be something to kind of play with. You'll also notice that like every once in a while there are curved things like these. And like I mentioned earlier, like you got to be careful not to be overly married to the ideas that you're coming up with, because if I was 100% committed to doing no curves, everything was 100% geometric, I wouldn't allow myself to do things like that. Is that okay? Sure, it's totally okay. It's your own work. If you want to confine yourself that much, you have the ability to do that. I like to mostly confine myself and then stray when I feel like it's necessary. And originally, I didn't want to have any weapons for this group that were, or any design elements for this group that were curved. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, at least from my perspective, that that would be pretty artificial. This is a group of fairly utilitarian folk. And so it makes sense to me that they would mostly have their stuff geometric, but that there would be certain times where it would make more sense even to them to have things be curved. Maybe particular kinds of blades make more sense that way. Maybe the arboretum, which they have inside their city, maybe it makes more sense for that to be a dome rather than, you know, a bizarrely hexagonally constructed manner of structure. So I try to mostly keep to an idea and then allow myself to stray. And again, if you're world building a group of people, and this group of people has existed for some amount of time, there's a really good chance that the design language has shifted over time. You know, maybe everybody originally did build everything geometrically, but that was hundreds of years ago. And as their ancestors have, you know, taken over, they're allowing themselves to use a little bit more curvilinear stuff. You could have that be an element in your story where some of the architecture looks a particular way and you can actually decipher like, oh, this is from, you know, the second dynasty because of these design elements. That is something that occurs in our real world. You know, we can go look at different columns in ancient Greece and Rome, and you can be like, well, this is a Doric column or Ionic or Corinthian, and those will tell you certain aspects about that people group. Generally, approximately what time they were building, but potentially who they were associated with, who they might have learned things from, all of which are fairly important things historically. So those could be components in your storytelling. You can have these elements that show up because of the way things are designed. So maybe in your town, some of the buildings have archways that are a certain height, and then maybe at one point they start becoming larger, and some characters like, well, what's up with that? It's like, oh, well, you know, we've got this other race of people now who spend time here, and in the past they never did, and they tend to be a little bit taller than our locals. So as the new buildings have gone in, we've tried to be accommodating of that. And, you know, businesses have seen that if they have doors and rooms and buildings that are more hospitable to this other race, then they have better business. And so, you know, some have actually ripped out their old doorways and archways and have replaced them so that they can get more business. Things like that are going to be just little interesting storytelling things. And maybe those things are, you know, just a little bit boring for you, and that's not where you want to spend your time, and that's, you know, it's understandable. I think those kinds of things are fascinating. And it's really just going to depend on how deep your world is. You know, if you're building it for yourself just for the fun, then like go ham. There are so many places you can go and so much fun you can have with it. And you're probably going to enjoy putting the time into those kinds of mental processes in thinking about those kinds of things. If you're building it specifically for like a D&D campaign or something, there's a good chance that that might be overkill, that your players are not going to care too much about that. If you're building a video game, or you're building this for a book that you're writing of some kind, then these elements might have a space. Some of the coolest lore and stuff and world building in video games is the stuff that's not specifically said, but you kind of start pulling apart. You think of Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom or Elden Ring or Dark Souls or Bloodborne. There's so much that you can tell by the world building decisions that are made. You can walk into an area and kind of have an idea of, oh, this people group must have built this because of these aspects. Sometimes in Elden Ring, you can just tell how old something is by seeing the styling with which it was built. Obviously, From Software, the designers of that game, were really intentional, really smart about making sure that the elements that they used were elements that would be similar enough to our real world that people would be able to pull things out. And so when you get into like the deep, deep underground, there are buildings that are very reminiscent of Mycenae and early Greece and Crete. And those things, because they have a real world analog for us, ring true. We kind of look at them subconsciously and understand like, oh, these are much older. But anybody who's educated in those realms or has been to those places or has even just spent a decent amount of time researching, those things are going to have this secondary level of significance. And that kind of stuff can be really, really fun to play with. If it's your jam, if it's, your hyperfixation and something you're interested in, it's obviously going to be worth putting time into. It's something that I'm not sure is worth putting the time into if you don't already get a lot of joy out of it. And that's probably something worth noting, is that because of the intensity of world building and how much time it takes, it's probably not always worth putting the time into learning a different language, devising a language, building out and researching things that you have no kind of intrinsic attachment to. Yeah, it's kind of like noble. If you're going to take the time and research all these things, just to make your story better, like that's really cool and admirable. But it can also be burdensome. And if you only have a certain amount of time that you can invest in your world building, I'm not sure it's the best way to spend your time. But I'd love to hear from all of you though in the comments below. Like, are weapons things that you have spent some time on? I know for a lot of us, that was a really interesting and like fun place to put our time. Especially if you grew up playing a lot of video games. Could have been very, very enjoyable to be like, yeah, we're going to make cool swords and spears and things that blow up. And I mean, I still enjoy it. Even being much older, it's still just a lot of fun to play with those kinds of elements. But yeah, I'm curious if that's something that is more widespread, if you have that similar desire, or if there's some other kind of small esoteric thing that you like working with in your world building that you kind of think is weird, or that you figure other people are not, putting that kind of time into like you are. I think in a lot of ways, world building allows you to hyperfixate on something. And it's really good for that. Like it's really good in that aspect. Whatever it is that is your particular hyperfixation or obsession or joy, world building gives you the ability to focus on that, because world building is not just setting up an arena for a story. It is building out real human components of what a time and space would look like in a reality and the laws of physics and all these things. And so the time is just like it's hard to waste too much time when you're world building. Like if your goal specifically is to tell the story or to get the minimum done so you can write your book, yes, you could be wasting time. But if it's just the world building itself, I think it's kind of rather hard to waste the time. If my goal is to write my books, then of course I could be putting too much time into world building and not enough time into writing. But if my goal is just to world build, to construct a believable world, there's not really a waste of time. I think back sometimes to Tolkien about this, and because his ultimate goal originally was to create these fictional languages. And then he went, well, it feels kind of lame to have these cool languages and nobody to speak them. And then so he devises people groups who might have actually logically spoken this way, or might have ended up in a place where this is how their language developed. And then from there, kind of the logical process to him was to make a history for those people and start building out how those people might have come to be. And then as he continues building, you get a world history, you get a mythos and a mythology, and these are all things that are based off of either language or his own love of myth. And, he did a lot of translations of things like Beowulf, and so he's got these fixations of his own. And eventually, he decides to put it down for a story. But he's a unique case where, was there ever a danger of him spending too much time on his world building? Probably not. Because for him, the world building was kind of the goal. And I imagine there's some of you listening now that is the case for you. For me, I think it's always been in service of the story. For a long time, it was a good strategy to help me avoid the stress and fear associated with actually writing the story. I am now writing my books. But for a long time, I kind of told myself, no, I'm not ready to write them. I need to keep building more of the world. I need to have the languages. I need to have the history. I need to have all these things. And sadly, I realized a couple years ago that was never really the case. And it was just me being afraid. That might be you. It is certainly, I'm not making a dig if that is you, or if you feel, I'm pushing that at you. That's not the case at all. That's just how I kind of realized in my own life that, oh crap, I am eternally practicing because I'm afraid of actually starting, because once I start, I can fail. Once I knew that, there was a trigger inside my brain, a switch. I was like, well, crap, now that I know that, I can't just keep doing this. I need to try. And so I sat down initially and decided to write out the basic mythology of what's the creation story for my world. Not as another means of dodging the beginning, the starting, but because I felt like for me it was really essential. We have a lot of things in our world, especially here in Western society, that are derivative of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and some of that's in our phraseology, some of that's in just how we think about and manage and deal with death. And I wanted to have some initial understanding of how that would work in this world, because that felt like something I would need in order to understand how to write this. So I took a couple weeks and wrote out this, basically the book of Genesis for my people. And then I began. I started with a random chapter, and just to kind of get my feet wet, and then eventually started at the beginning of the story, and just kind of from there kept going. And it's been about 2.5 years now, and I am 30% into my third novel, and I think now I'm kind of finally happy with the way that I'm writing. It took a while. And my world building is in service of that. And so when I'm doing these kinds of things, I am thinking specifically of what I can write about, what I can mention, what I could include as illustrations in the novels that would make things make a little bit more sense. And so shape language, the way a weapon from this people looks versus another people, is an important thing to me. A lot of those visual cues are things I use for describing, for mentioning, and I think that just makes it a little bit more lived in. The hope is, of course, that it makes the world feel a little bit more full, a little bit more interesting. And, time will tell if that is actually achieved. I have actually just started, just last night when I'm recording this, had my first meeting with a group of friends who are in my writing group, and we have now started a read aloud group. It's kind of like our own little thing, loosely associated. And basically what it is it gives us the opportunity to finally read our works in a small group setting and hear feedback immediately from other people. and it is rather nerve-wracking. Went well, but it's yeah. So much of this kind of work happens on your own when no one else is around, and so it's really intriguing to be like, oh, I'm actually going to be like in front of people, and they're going to hear my work and, potentially judge this work and evaluate it. But at the same time, it's very vindicating because a lot of this work is done in secret. And so it's kind of nice to have somebody actually hear it and be like, yeah, no, that makes sense. Like, I understand what you're talking about in this chapter. And yeah. But that's kind of the driving idea for me when I'm building these things, as I'm thinking about how do these serve the story. I also just really enjoy the process, so I probably put a bit more time into it than is strictly speaking necessary, but that's fine too. I think that love comes through in the art, and then the love comes through in the writing as it's kind of related to that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this session here. I would love to hear from you in the comments below if there's anything you want me to talk about or expand on in this. If you have any questions that I can answer in future sessions, I would love to hear them. I always appreciate the feedback. It's just curious and interesting to me to see what other people are pulling from this or what they're working on. So, as always, thanks for being here. Thanks to my patrons as well, who are on the screen right now. If you want to check out the Patreon or the Discord, they're both linked below. Have a lovely rest of your day. I'm going to go nurse this throat because I am still recovering from being sick, and it is so annoying. Ugh. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.